Hey everybody, this is Rob again, and today we're going to be doing yet another RGB mod, this one on a Super Nintendo Mini. If you have seen my N64 RGB mod video, this is going to look very, very familiar to you. And that's because the N64 and the Super Nintendo Mini mod is almost identical. In fact, it's so similar that it uses the exact same RGB amp. On the back of this, it actually says RGB amp version 2.1, SNES/N64 by Bordy4938. So this RGB amp is based on the THS7314 chip, which is this little guy right here. I found out today, and I don't know, I guess it's been a while, I don't go to retrorgb.com every single day, but since I did the N64 video, I think that this got replaced by a newer one. There's a 7374 chip, not necessarily already replaced, but they're in the somebody's developed a new RGB amp basically, and it's supposed to have slightly better RGB. But honestly, at this point, you're really starting to split hairs. If there's a better alternative, sure, you should get the 7374. But at this point, you know, if you can get your console onto RGB, that's really all you need. You just want to get it to at least the best type of connection possible. You know, just to reiterate the different types of connections, the lowest is RF, which is radio frequency modulation. That's where you put in for newer people, you would screw in the RF adapter or the RF modulator into the cable port, and you would tune it into, you know, channel 3 or something like that. That is the worst signal because it has a lot of interference. The colors are all blurry. It'll put a picture on the screen, but it's not ideal. Better than that, the RCA/composite. Those are the red, white, and yellow cables that you just plug in. Those are ubiquitous. You see them everywhere. They're pretty good, especially compared to RF. You know, they can do the job. They're okay. But then higher than that, you have Super Video or S Video. That was kind of an uncommon connector. It was a circular connector with 4 pins in there, I think. But it wasn't very popular, but it produced quite a distinctly better picture than the RCA/composite connectors. But above that, the one that most people will remember as far as analog, at least in America, is component. So prior to HDMI, most people that wanted the best quality picture would hook up their equipment via component signals. So higher than components that we didn't see in America is RGB, and that's just pure red, green, blue signal that gets sent to your monitor or television. That produces the best colors, the most accurate colors, and the sharpest image. So if you can, try to put all your retro consoles on RGB and then buy decent quality Sony PVM or BVM, and you're going to be amazed. You won't really appreciate the RGB output until you see it in person. For the all that other stuff, composite, RF, it'll function, and if you just want to play the game, sure. But once you start getting down to it, if you just do RGB, I think you'll be very happy. So anyway, going back to this, again, the 7314 is going to do us great. I've been using a Super Nintendo Mini with the 7314 in it for a while, and it looks absolutely fantastic. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this sucker apart. One other thing to note is this thing doesn't have S-Video either. And the larger Super Nintendos, actually, you don't even need an amp for the larger one. So if you want to go the cheaper, easier route, just in most people have a larger Super Nintendo, just buy an RGB Euroscart cable for your Super Nintendo NTSC. And if you have a PVM or BVM or a TV that supports RGB, then you'll be happy. It'll be more than good enough. And the only reason I like to use the Mini is because it does produce a slightly better signal, and I just like tinkering with my consoles. And actually, I kind of prefer the smaller size. It doesn't have an eject button, which doesn't bother me because I don't think I ever really used it before anyway. And it doesn't have a power LED, and it doesn't have S-Video. But if I'm using RGB, I don't need S-Video anyway. So for me, the Super Nintendo Mini is the way to go. But if you have a larger one, don't feel like you don't even need to modify. Just go ahead and get the right cable and the right monitor. You'll be fine. But okay, so getting back to this, like all the Nintendo consoles, there have security bits on them of some kind. And for this one, you're going to need the 4.5mm game bit, which is should be, if you're working on any retro consoles, you should definitely have this in your toolbox. There's also a 3.8mm game bit. These are for opening cartridges. Because collectors are paying crazy amounts of money for cartridges now. I've seen at a retro game convention somebody carry this around. If they're buying an expensive cartridge, hundreds of dollars, they open up the NES cartridge. I saw this happen actually a couple of weekends ago at the Classic Game Fest here in Austin. Somebody opened up the cartridge to verify that the chips were real chips and not a reproduction. So that's for the cartridges. This is a 4.5mm game bit, and it also opens up non-Nintendo stuff. Like I found that it opens up the Turbo Duo and the Super Graphics, Super CD-ROM. So anyway, so it's just got a weird kind of star on the end there, and we're just going to open this up. If you want to know where to get that amplifier, by the way, go to retrorgb.com. I mentioned them before. I might have already mentioned it in this video actually, but they should, under their RGB, and don't get discouraged when you go to their page because there's a lot of information there, but under their SNES Mini RGB mod page, they'll have a link to where you can buy this amplifier. And by the time you watch this video, they might even have the 7374 amp available for purchase. But as of today, they do not. Let's see if I got all the... Okay, so I got all of those guys. I like to set aside the screws in the same order that they came because I feel like sometimes the screws just fit better in the holes that they were originally in. So let's see if we can get this guy apart. Being a little stubborn. Okay. I was going to say, there shouldn't be any more screws. Alright, so that's the inside, and you can see it's a very clean design because they've shrunk everything down. You're always going to find some stuff in here, dust balls, little bugs, spiders, lots of stuff. Depending on what your kids or other kids stuck in the cartridge slot, you may even find money, all kinds of crazy stuff. But let's go ahead and take the rest of these out, and these don't require security bits. These are just standard Phillips screws, and you're basically going to unscrew everything. If there's a screw, you're going to take it off. Alright, these may or may not be off camera. I'm not really paying attention to those. So what we got here is the board itself. Well, let's take off the shielding. Taking apart the Super Nintendo Mini it's actually not that scary. There are plenty of guides out there on how to do this, and you're watching this now, and there's actually very few screws. There are other consoles that are just, oh my goodness, they're pains, but this one's not so bad. So basically, you're just gonna look for all the screws and take them off. I think there's one here. Yes, there is. We're just going to pull off the motherboard. Oh, it's already coming off. Let's get this off, I guess. Alright. I need that screw. Alright. There we go. So, take off the shielding too. Set that aside. So this heatsink here will have to get removed, and you have to remove this one from the bottom, and that's because we're going to be soldering something into here. It's just too difficult to get in there. So unless you've got a really thin soldering iron and really steady hands, I would go ahead and just remove this heatsink. This one's kind of tough. I don't want to strip that out. Let me see if I can find a sharper Phillips head for that one. All right, I have a couple of options here. Here's Mr. Stubby, and he's got a lot of different Phillips head options, and I have a pretty small one in there. Holy smokes, that is on pretty good. Oh, finally. I just didn't want to strip it. Alright. So there we go. Is that it for the shielding? Oh, I think there's one. Yeah. There is one more. You can kind of see it there. Maybe it's right here. Let me see if I can get it with this one here. Come on, Mr. Stubby, move out of the way. Okay. So, got the heatsink off, and that's what it looks like inside the Super Nintendo Mini. So what you're going to be doing is there is a pin on the sRGB chip, which is this chip here, that has the sync that we're going to be using. So RGB uses RG and B, right? Red, green, blue, but it also needs a sync signal so that it can put all those colors together in an image that makes sense. Otherwise, the image is all garbled. It has all the color information, but it doesn't know how to put it together properly. So RGB is actually a 4-cable video output. So because this Mini doesn't have S-Video, it doesn't have sync, if you wanted to enable S-Video or do RGB, you need to at least put, for RGB, you need to at least put the sync on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify, or not modify, we're going to solder a cable from the sync pin and go down this hole and then put it to the multi-out. So this is the multi-out here, and the pins that correspond to the multi-out are right here. So we're going to get the C-Sync from here, put it through the hole, solder it onto one of these multi-out pins, and then once we do that, then we can take the RGB amp, and it actually just slides over, or it should, there we go, slides over the pins there, and then you solder the ones that are relevant. There are 1, 2, you can kind of see because they're silvery, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pins that have a silver ring around them, or a silver part that you can 7? No, that's a chip. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. There's 6 solder points. These two is this is actually something soldered on there. So that will allow you to send the amplified video signal and the C-Sync to the multi-out. And then here you see B, G, and R. Those are the blue, green, and red signals, which you're going to tap from somewhere in here. I'll have to look at the diagram. I think it's like in this area here. So all we're going to do again is solder from the RGB points here to here. Then this little thing's going to amplify it and send it to the multi-out pins here, which will come out of here. And again, the only other thing we have to do is enable the C-Sync so that we can actually get those RGB signals to synchronize and we get an actual image. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and start to cut the wires to do this. I'm using 30 gauge wire. Yeah, 30 gauge wire. It's pretty thin. If you want and you want to get fancy, you can get different colored wire for the red, green, and blue, and also get maybe a black one for sync. But I just use the same color. I mean, nobody's really going to see it. And you can get thicker gauge if you want, but I find that 30 gauge works pretty good for this kind of mod. And then I have some silver solder that I use to solder all the wires. And just I can't find a good wire stripper for a 30 gauge. It's just too small, so I just use this thing. Yeah, it's my trusty old wire cutters. So I'm going to give this a pause, cut out some cables, strip them, and then I'll be back and we'll get this thing soldered into place. Alright everybody, I am back, and I've done a little extra than cut them. I went ahead and did the hard soldering, I should say. Now it's not terribly difficult, but of the soldering that was going to be done, that was going to be the most tedious, and I didn't want to just chew up a whole bunch of video time like I usually do just on tedious soldering. So I'll show you what I've done now. So what I've done is I have soldered onto, let's try to get close up here. Let's see. There is a chip that says sRGB on it. I'll get focus on there. And on pin 18, I have soldered a 30 gauge wire there to the C-Sync. So that's the sync signal that we're going to be using for RGB. It is a pin 18. You can see that it says 13 there, and it goes on the way up. So right there, and there's a little marker there. If you look on the retro RGB site, you'll see a close-up of it, but it's pretty simple to find. And all I do is I put a little dab of solder on that pin on the chip, and then a little bit of solder on the wire, and then bend it, and I put it right there so they're touching, and I just quickly tapped it with the I barely touched it with the soldering gun or iron, and it's stuck on there pretty good. Now once you do that, you're going to route it through this little hole here. Don't do it through this one. That's where if you put it through there, you're going to smush it or actually you can't even do that because the screw goes through there for the heatsink that attaches to that and this and this. So there's a hole here that you can use to put it through there, and then you route the sync to pin 3 on the multi-out. So the pins on this one don't run right to left like that. They go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way down to 11, 12. So pin 3 here next to pin 1 is where you're gonna route that sync cable to, or sync wire to, and you want to keep it really low profile, and that's because this is going to go on top of it, the RGB amp, so it just fits over those holes there. And if you don't keep it low profile, you'll put too much solder, this thing won't fit right, and then you'll have to just take it all off and do it again. You can also put it on top if you want. That's up to you. I think it looks a little cleaner this way. But yeah, so that's the sync cable, or the sync wire I've already done. And the other things I've done is I've actually tapped into the RGB already for the amplifier inputs. So this is the output of RGB. So you can find them easily because they're next to R1C1, next to this little green pattern here. And from left to right, it's red, green, and blue, which corresponds to red, green, and blue here. So it'll work out pretty nicely. So all I'm going to do now is solder this RGB amp in place, and then solder these guys into that. And honestly, that's done. I'm going to give it a shot after, just give it a test after that. But let's go ahead and do that real quick. Make sure that we're back in focus. There we go. All right. Let's see. Let's go ahead and do the soldering of the RGB amp. Let me get these guys out of the way. Okay. So remember, you don't have to solder every single point on here. You just have to get the ones with the silver rings on them. Okay, so while I meant to show you me soldering the RGB amp into place and these wires onto the RGB amp, I ran out of space on my camera, so that's okay. It wasn't that exciting, really. So let me just show you the finished product. So you see here, I went from the RGB points to the RGB amp. Very simple. This actually has, these solder pads already have some solder on there, so it's really simple. You just strip a little bit of the wire and heat up the pad, touch it, boom, it's done. It's really simple. These parts are also very simple too. I just put a little blob of solder on the 6 points and it's secure now. And again, the C-Sync is on pin 18 of the RGB amp, or the RGB chip, and that's it. So just going to give it a shot. I'm going to plug it in just like this without putting it all back together to make sure it works. And if it works, and it should work, I'll just show you putting it back together, and I'll give you one final update of a game running in RGB, and we'll be done. All right, so let me go make this let me go test this and see if it works, and I'll be right back. Okay, so good news, it worked. It worked, so first time, and there's no reason it shouldn't work. It's a very simple mod. But one thing I should have mentioned, if you're going to be taking this thing apart anyway, this is a great time to give the shells a little bit of a bath here. If you recall, when I opened it up, there was some dust bunnies in there, and you can see some kind of crud in here and the Super Nintendo logo. And all I do is just takes a couple of extra screws to remove. Basically, I don't like to get any metal involved when we're doing anything relating to water. So I just take these screws off here for the cartridge slot door cover. This is basically just for the spring-loaded door cover. And take these off. Comes off of that, and then here are the door spring-loaded doors. So just take those off. I typically don't need to wash those. I'll maybe give them a little rub down, but everything else is plastic. These are easy to pop out. These are just, you just squeeze them and push them through. And yeah, just give it I just use warm soap, warm water and dish soap. I always have trouble saying that. Dish soap and warm water. And yeah, just give it a little rub down, maybe a sponge or something, get in the crevices, and it should be good to go. It'll look amazing, fantastic afterwards. So let me go do that. I'll be right back. Okay, it has been cleaned out with, again, warm water and dish soap. And it looks way better. You can see that all that gunk that was surrounding the Super Nintendo and Nintendo logos, that's all gone, and it has just a much cleaner look. I took all the gunk out of in between these crevices here, and we cleaned out the buttons. So let's just put it back together then. So these buttons are only going to go in one way. This one's easy because it's got a dot and it points towards the on-off markings there, and this one is slotted because it's curved, only goes in one way. So just make sure that you got it in the slot. There it is. So yeah, there you go, nice and clean. Sometimes you have a lot of gunk under here, so that makes it a lot easier. All right, and let's put the doors back on. Again, they only go in one way, so you can't really mess it up as long as you get them in the correct slots. Oops. There we go. They won't go in but one way, and they're spring-loaded, so they can be a little tricky to hold in place, but not too bad. There we go. You got to make sure that everything fits nice and solid. You can tell when it's not in right. All right, so once we got that in place, we just put this little cover back in here and drop these guys back in the holes. Screw them in. Last one. All right. There we go. Looks much nicer, right? All right, so let's get the base. Got that here. And here's the board that we've modified. Now, we have to put this on first because the screws to that are on the bottom. So let's line this up. Again, if you use something other than 30 gauge, just be really careful because you can pinch the sync wire here. The 30 gauge is so thin that it goes right underneath without any problems. I probably have to go in reverse order and put this one in first. Let me get this out of the way for now. I know you can't see real well, but it's pretty obvious what you have to do. There's a hole, and you have a screw, and you screw it into the hole. I wouldn't tighten it all the way so that you have a little wiggle room for this part at the bottom. And then put these back on. That was the son of a gun. That was hard to do. You can tell because it had more damage on the screw head. Yeah. And let's line these up. Oh. It's kind of weird. It felt a little pop. Okay, it just snapped into place, that's all. The holes weren't lining up, and now they are. Just get this one started. Let's use Mr. Stubby. I have, it's a more narrow, I mean it's got different bits on there, but this particular bit has a smaller, sharper point, and I think that's what we need for these screws here. There we go. Hopefully it won't be as hard to put back on as it was to take off, because that thing was kind of stuck. That looks like it's going good. The threads are fine. It was just tightened really, really tightly, which was totally unnecessary. Okay. That's good. Then we'll tighten this one up. Alright, so the heatsink is in place. And now we're just going to put it back into the base. Where did I leave the base? There it is. Right in front of me. So I just feed this back part in. Should just drop in. Drops right in place. Now we can put the shielding back in. There it is. It's all pretty straightforward. Everything only goes in one way. So if you don't feel it go in exactly right, you probably have the wrong thing in the wrong place, because it should feel perfect and just drop into place. I'm just going to go ahead and just thread all these or start them to make sure that I got them all before I start screwing them in. This one goes. This one's a little tougher to get in there because my hands aren't that small, so let's use our needle nose pliers and drop that right there. There we go. And those are all the screws, so let's just start putting them in. Screw down the cartridge slot. And finally, this screw here by the multi-out. And these don't have to be super tight, just hand tight's fine. You know, as soon as you get some resistance, you can probably stop. Just making sure. Yep, these all look pretty good. Yep, good. And then we just drop this in. And you got to make sure that the power switch lines up. So put it both to off. There, it's got a perfect fit. And let's drop in our security bits, or security screws. And then we'll put our security bit back on the screwdriver. not cooperating. Let's try a different one. All right, this one just went right in. It's not screwed all the way. Good, this one went in too. What about this guy? I think that's in there. This one's giving me trouble. Let's pop it out. What's wrong with this one? Nothing. Let's just jump back in there. There we go. Now it caught in there. So my screwdriver's head here barely fits into this hole. So that was fortuitous. And you can get the security bits at different lengths. Some of them, I've seen some of them that are pretty long. Alright, so I don't want to strip it, so again, just hand tight's fine. And the last one. Alright. Well, there we are. All the buttons seem to work okay. Let me plug it in as one whole unit, and I'll give you a little follow-up to make sure that everything's still working, but unless something jostled loose, should be fine. Alright, I'll be right back. Okay everybody, we are back, and this is the completed Super Nintendo Mini with the RGB mod in place, and I have it connected to this Olympus OEV203. I've talked about this monitor before. It's actually a very underrated monitor. Because it's branded Olympus and not Sony, a lot of people don't know about it, so they overlook it. So it goes for a lot less than its Sony equivalent. It is a monitor that was originally made for medical use. Again, there's actually a Sony equivalent that's exactly the same thing that doesn't have the Olympus badge that goes for more. So if you find one of these, definitely pick it up. I highly recommend them. They have 2 RGB inputs. And anyway, let's give this a shot here. And you'll see right there it says RGBA, the A input. There's a B input as well. And look, there, it's working perfectly. Sound is all in place. We didn't modify the sound, so there's no reason it shouldn't have been working perfectly. Yeah, the colors are amazing. I know you can't tell because I'm just shooting it with this camera, external camera. There's really no way to experience this other than to see it live. So if you can afford it, just go out and buy, or afford the space really, because they're not that expensive. You can spend a lot of money on a PVM, but honestly, you can buy one of these for, like, if you really look, and you can probably get them for less than $200 shipped. And yeah, they just look amazing. All right, guys. Well, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Look out for more videos coming soon. The next one I'm going to do is probably an RGB mod for my Super CD-ROM 2 that I just got. I'm just right now I'm in a PC Engine mode, so I think that's going to be my next one. So look out for that one. All right, thanks for watching.